You even mentioned, like, some people say that there's no discrimination, but at least you have a personal story that someone literally discriminated against you just because you are a female coach. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Minds of Media. My name is Blake Penishevitz, and I am excited to announce today's guest. She is an OWL-level coach who worked for Optic Academy, Metabellum in Korea, and lastly, the Washington Justice. Please let me introduce Molly Kim, maybe better known as Avalla. Welcome to the show.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to the show.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on the show. First of all, I always like to have people who come from interesting backgrounds. And you come from a very interesting background, I have to say. First of all,
I do.
I think everyone assumes that, I mean, you are Korean, right?
I am Korean.
Okay, I didn't want to assume something, but you're also from Australia.
Yeah.
That is interesting. So I always like to start off the show fairly easy. Where's Australia following this? Do you associate as an Australian? Do you associate as like a Korean? Are you like, I'm both? I'm a Korean Australian, which is cool as shit.
So something interesting about me is that I was obviously born in Australia. I grew up there until I was 7. And then my family relocated to New Zealand when I was 8 until I was 14. So my childhood was more associated with New Zealand rather than Australia.
Okay.
So even though I used to have an Australian citizenship, which I now gave up, I tend to associate myself more as maybe a Kiwi than I would as Australian.
That's hilarious. Okay. Isn't
Yeah.
there something with like New Zealand and Australian people getting them mixed up and both people getting very upset about that? Is that a real thing?
Yes, there is. That is a real thing. And yeah, unfortunately though, like ever since I moved to Korea, like I'm the type of person who gets influenced with accents a lot. And like all of Korean people speak American English. So that's like why my English has like no accent of either New Zealand or Australia anymore. I have like a almost like 80% American accent now. So that's kind of unfortunate.
Do you miss it? Because I have to admit, both those accents, New Zealand and Australian, sound better than American. I'm just going to throw that out there as an American.
I do kind of miss it. I think that it's like especially very unique, and especially in the OWL scene, since there are not many Aussies or Kiwis, I do think like having a decent accent would make me more distinguished in a way. Easy to recognize, but I mean, I'm stuck with it now, so.
Yeah, so actually, looking at that in the OWL scene and people from Australia or New Zealand, I think you're the only one from New Zealand.
No, there's also Color Hex.
Oh, I thought he was from Australia.
I think he's from New Zealand.
Okay, he might be. I don't want to mix this up because like Color Hex later on is going to be like, I'm going to kill you now for calling you one or the other one. There isn't very many from really either. You have Custa, Gunba, Color Hex, and you from both like Australia or New Zealand, right? I think those are the 4 people in OWL. And maybe if you look at that like players versus staff, it's like a very small percentage. Yet Australia's always done at least fairly well at like World Cup. Why don't you think there are more either people from Kiwis or Aussies from those places? Why don't you think Overwatch pulls them?
I think one of the biggest reason is the kind of like compared to Korean players or American players, the number of pool of people that there are is so little compared to other countries, especially for like countries like Australia and New Zealand. And it is very often like Grandmaster players get matched with like Plat players or Diamond players. And it's really hard to get a high SR. So there is not much of a very good practice grounds. And I know that a lot of like Australian or New Zealand players VPN to like West Coast and play West Coast. And I think like those like lack of being able to be matched at a high SR like hinders their ability to get decent practice. And also I know that a lot of Australian teams scrim like with Korean teams, but since they are on higher ping and since some Korean teams don't prefer playing with teams that are on high ping, it'll be harder for them to get good scrims. And I think those kind of factors combined do affect them being in like a lot of players being in an OWL level.
Okay, so what about World Cup then? Is World Cup just not consideration then? Because if you look at the Australian team at least, they've always done fairly well. Like for like comparative to like the resources they have compared to any other like region. You compare them to Korea, you compare them to like NA, you compare them to Canada. All these teams have OWL level coaches and OWL level, like definitely OWL players in their system. But Australia's always done fairly well. Is World Cup not a good consideration for looking at players?
I didn't think World Cup is a good consideration. Like the amount of like players who gets noticed in World Cup is like huge, and those players tend to do well like in the next OWL season as well. So I think that it is a good consideration. It's just that since players come from very different backgrounds, like the number of players that there are, the number of infrastructure the country supports for their World Cup team very much differs. And I think Australia and New Zealand both have the talent. I do follow like a lot of contenders players in those scenes. And I do think that there is talent, and that's why those kind of talent do really pop off in World Cup. And like since they do get a better like environment, I guess, towards World Cup, that is why they're able to do a lot more better than they are usually seen as.
Yeah, so I actually recently had Gumba on the show. The show hasn't been released yet, so you haven't probably seen it. Not that you watch my content anyways, but if you did, Gumba was recently on the show. And one of the things Gumba said was that teams in OWL don't scout, at least the teams that he knows, don't really scout anything from Australia. They don't even get tryouts half the time. And so this kind of made me lead into probably a question that maybe is better off later, but I kind of want to ask it now just because it's kind of relevant. Right. The teams that you know of and that you've talked to, is Australia something that is like scouted? Is it something that people are like, oh yeah, we need to make sure that we check out Australia?
Not usually. I don't think even when I scout and I think that, I think player A on this team is really talented. Usually the kind of response I get is, I don't think like they are already, or I don't think it's really worth it. I think contenders players from like contenders Korea or like contenders China or contenders, NA who did a lot more better is better. And I do think that some talents do go unnoticed. And I think having Gauntlet and the change of contender system that is happening next season is actually really interesting, because I think from those kind of system, teams like Australian teams or like even Pacific teams that they get unnoticed gets noticed a lot. Like for example, Talon Esports, like everyone in Korea, well, I want to say everyone, but a lot of people in Korea thought that they were like almost similar to like tier 3 teams or like open division teams, but like in the Gauntlet they turned out to be like one of the better teams out of all the teams that participated, right? And they did show prospect, and they did show a lot of talent. And I heard so many OWL coaches saying that like, oh my god, like I think that player is like really talented, I'm actually like interested in, and then they find out, oh, he's actually underage. But so I think the difference in contender system and having Gauntlet itself will actually help those players from other regions be more noticed in the OWL seasons coming up.
So one of the things I kind of wanted to ask you about is this issue of like not scouting players, because you even mentioned that, hey, I thought these players look good, but people were like, oh, they don't look OWL ready, or they don't. Does it have to do with the fact that you try to look more at objective measurements and other people are going more by feel? Do you think that that's part of the problem with like scouting right now, is a lot of scouting is done by feel rather than like objective measurements?
It's just that there is limited time on scouting. Something that like a lot of the management that I've worked with really liked about me is that I tend to do scouting like throughout the season. So I like to watch contenders, not just Korea, but NA, Australia, EU, whenever I can. And because I watch so many contenders matches, I tend to see more players, tend to notice more players. I watch a lot of player streams, whether it's like contenders players or like OWL players, and like I do my scouting on a daily basis, whereas a lot of other teams or like other staff members, there isn't just that much enough of a time. So a lot of even this season, like a lot of the scouting was focused on the Gauntlet instead of like other contenders matches. And I mean, like if they perform very well in Gauntlet, that means they are likely to be one of the best players in the Overwatch League. So that is why more scouting tends to be focused there. Because if you have limited resources, it's really important to use it efficiently. And the way to like use it more efficiently is maybe to focus on like the Korea scene, the NA scene more than like other regions. So I think it's something that happens very naturally.
Okay, so this is a good thing to bring up. Everyone always assumes, like, scouting gets brought up, and I just know this because when I worked on Gladiators, like, everyone thinks that there's, like, dedicated scouts in the scene that, like, look at talents, and I don't think that's really the case. It might start to be eventually, but as far as I know right now, that's not true. What basically ends up happening for, I think, most teams is they go through the entire season, they then stop, and then the coaching staff has to now try to scout talent for next year. And I think that's how it works for like the majority of teams. Is this kind of what you've seen too? I mean, you mentioned that you actually looked during the entire year, which I like. We'll get into like mental burnout and stress later on because that sounds like no life. But is that what kind of you've noticed too? Is that there isn't really any dedicated scouts in the scene? It's mostly just the coaching staff now has to scout for next year.
I think it really differs by teams. I know that some teams do operate like that, whereas some teams, they do have dedicated scouters who scout not only like contenders players, but even like open division players and a lot of like ladder players. So it's really team by team, and it's just how much resources a team can afford, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to jump back. You were born in Australia, right? So is it terrifying that everything in Australia can kill you?
What?
Is it terrifying that all of the creatures in Australia can kill you? Like, everything there is deadly. So
I mean, spiders and stuff, but I don't think so. Like, personally, I'm the kind of person who doesn't feel scared a lot.
Okay.
Actually, I'm scared of birds, but birds are kind of different.
You're scared of birds over spiders that can legit kill? Or alligators? I think you guys have alligators, or maybe it's crocodile. I don't know if you have crocodiles or alligators.
But yeah, I'm scared of birds.
Okay, that's interesting. So do you remember your time in Australia? Because you said you moved when you were 7, but so you'd have been pretty young.
Yeah, I was pretty young, and people who know me know that I have terrible memory. So I actually have trouble like remembering 1 year back. So like 20 years back in my life, it's pretty hard to remember for me.
Okay. That's fair. Do you have any brothers or sisters?
No, I'm an only child, so
only child.
That makes it worse.
Yeah, a little bit. We're gonna be bringing back some of these memories for you. I guarantee you we'll pull some up. What did your parents do growing up?
My mom was an English teacher, so that's obviously why I have better English than a lot of other people, and why she decided to raise me overseas rather than in Korea. My dad was a businessman. He still does business, so.
Okay. So how did your parents end up in Australia? Because I'm assuming they were, or were they always in Australia? Because you mentioned your mom wanted you to grow up overseas.
So my parents were both college students when they got married. After they graduated, my dad's family was really rich, so his parents decided, hey, why don't you guys go to Australia on a honeymoon and live there for a few years and learn English? And my parents thought, hey, that's a great idea. So that's how I ended up in New Zealand. In Australia. And then when I was 7 or 8, I think towards 8, my parents wanted to move back because my dad wanted to, do business. My mom wanted to like go back to her family. So that's why we moved. We were gonna move back to Korea, but then we had a short trip to New Zealand for 2 months where I was like going to school there, kind of doing the preschool, kind of like hanging out. And then I decided I really like it here. So I said I want to live in New Zealand rather than go back to Korea. So So my parents decided that, okay, that's fine, and we're gonna make you do homestay there. So we're gonna go back, and you're not coming back with us. So
They
I
just
stayed
left you.
back.
They're like, goodbye.
No, not really. They set up everything, but yeah, I wanted to be there so much, and my parents really respected my decision, even though I was like 7 or 8 at the time. So yeah, I lived with a homestay parent since I was 8 until I was 14. During breaks, I did go back to Korea like once a year for like
Yeah.
1 month-ish or 2 weeks. But my majority of childhood was spent in New Zealand.
So okay, so what is so you said that they left you with a home, it's called home study? Like parent?
Homestay.
Homestay?
Like HOMESTA.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
homestay.
So what is a homestay exactly? Is it like a school where you're just in like almost like a private school, or are you living with another family?
Oh, yeah, you're living with another family. So pretty
Okay.
much you're living with a family,
Mhm.
and you go to the same school as their kids. You eat and do everything like together. Yeah, so basically
Interesting.
they're like raising me for money.
Okay.
But I stayed with the same family so first family I stayed there for 3 years, and then I moved school. So I stayed with another family for 4 years. So both of them were pretty much family. And like I remember like during my birthdays, they would like create this fancy birthday cake for me. Like once I was really into playing the piano, and they created like a piano, 2-story cake for me and stuff like that. So yeah.
I was going to ask you then. You must have spent way more time with this family than like even your own family back in Korea. That you must have bonded extremely well with them, and they must have been just like family. Was it ever weird, the fact that you were like living with a different family and you didn't see your family at all? Like if I can imagine being back in school. I went to a mean school. I will lay this on first. Okay, so my school is not very nice. People would have definitely asked like, where are your parents at? Why aren't you living with your parents? So was there ever anything like, this is way different than anyone else that's around me? Or is it a common thing for people to do homestays? Because I've never heard of it before.
So I think something that was good about our school was that there was like 8 Korean kids that was sent there as like study abroads from Korea. They were like similar age, so there was a lot of kids who was doing the similar stuff as me. So it was like pretty common for them to see people like me. So it wasn't as weird. And I think, I don't know, like back at the time, our like kids were so nice. Like they didn't even like think about it. I don't think I was like ever questioned like that, and they were really nice, to be honest.
Nice. That's amazing. So you mentioned that you at least like piano. Was music a huge part of your life?
Yes, I actually double majored in music in college. I didn't play piano for a very long time, but I played drums, like jazz drum, for 8 years. And then I played jazz piano for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, music was pretty much a big part of my life growing up. I don't know if I really liked it. I just did it. So I started playing the drums because it looked cool, I want to do stuff that looks cool, right? So like I remember I started playing the drums when I was like 12, and I started playing because a friend of mine, a very close yet a rival of mine, started to learn drums. And I was like, hey, that's actually so cool. I'm going to start learning the drums now. And I copied her and like started playing the drums. And then she gave up after like 1 year. Then I kept playing. So I did that until college.
Okay. I actually played guitar, and I remember playing in jazz band and stuff like that. It was a lot of fun. Rock bands were I won't lie, I enjoyed playing in rock bands way more than I played in jazz band, just because I like the crowds better, to be honest. But I mean, that's kind of just the way that it rolls, I guess. So kind of looking at like the different cultural aspect, you have like many different cultures that you're interacting with. You have your family, which is back in Korea and has, I'm assuming, a very strong Korean like culture. And then you have your family in New Zealand, which I imagine is fairly different, right, than your family back home. How do you deal with competing culture? So did you have to worry about like the stereotypical like tiger mom thing? Is that something that was an issue for you, where your parents were on you about like your grades and stuff?
So I was very fortunate to not have a tiger mom slash helicopter mom.
Hmm.
My parents, I guess because they did spend a lot of their time
Yeah.
overseas, were very unprotective of me.
Wow.
So they were like, whatever decisions you make, those are like decisions you're gonna take with you in life. We're not gonna care. Like
They're
that's
dropping the
why.
philosophy bombs on you. They're like, you get to make your own decisions.
Yeah, they were actually the ones who said, you know what? I think you should quit law school for gaming. Like not a lot of Asian parents do that.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, I was very fortunate. My parents never ever asked me to study at all. Um, I was like not really top of my class when I was in
Really?
high school because my high school was a private high school with 100 kids, and it
Hmm.
was like one of the most hardest competing schools to get into in Korea. It was like an international school, and there was just like so many talented kids there. But
Hmm.
then my parents, like, I remember out of 100 students, I got like 91st in math one day, like at the start of my high school year. And my parents are like, hey, there are like 9 kids behind you. I'm proud of that. So, yeah, they were
That's.
always very supportive of whatever decisions I make.
Uh-huh.
Um, so, yeah.
So you lived in New Zealand till you said you're right around 14, right?
hmm
Why did you move back to Korea? I'm assuming you moved back to Korea because you mentioned Korean school.
So in New Zealand, well, I guess it was 14 Korean age, but it'll be around 12, 13 American age. So New Zealand has this education system where you do 5 years of elementary school,
Yep.
2 years of junior high, and then 5 years of high school.
Hmm.
Um, so at year 8, I graduated junior high, I guess.
Hmm.
And then oops, my Siri. And then when I try to get and then my parents thought that New Zealand high schools weren't competitive enough, like
Okay.
educationally, so they wanted me to move back to Korea. And then because Korea has an education system where you have to have 6 years of elementary school, 3 years of middle school, and 3 years of high school, they said that I have to go to middle school again.
Hmm.
So my parents didn't really like that. So then they made me do homeschool, like I did GED for
Hmm.
middle school. So I skipped a year and went to a very competitive international boarding school after that.
Wow. Was that nerve wracking? Like doing that? Was that something that was like really terrifying to be like moving schools and getting into this like highly almost elite school that is very challenging?
I don't think so. Like, so growing up, I
Hmm.
was top of my class
Yeah.
in elementary school. I was like the class leader. Oh, even here, like if you see, I don't know if you guys can see,
Lift up.
but I have like these
Ooh.
awards that I got in elementary school. Like I was the top of the class. I was like the house leader.
Hmm.
Um, and like I always thought I was like, hey, I'm pretty smart kind of a kid. So even moving back to Korea, like there is like there is a GED. So every year you can take 2 GED exams.
Yeah.
And in order to even apply to the international school, you have to get an average of 90.
Hmm.
And when I first took the test, I just took it as like a practice test, but uh, I got 100 on 3 subjects and like 96 in one and then like 86 in the other. So I was like nailing it in my
Hmm.
first practice exam. So I was like, I passed just like by trying once. So I was like, hey, this is pretty easy. I got into the international high school pretty easy. I was actually the first person to get in, but after having a GD or something. So yeah, I don't think I felt like nerve wracking. I was always so confident in myself.
Hmm. That confidence is, I've always kind of noticed that about you, like in a lot of your interviews, especially like the written ones, you always kind of come up very confident about yourself. Where do you think that comes from, this like self-love and being so confident in your ability?
I think a lot of it comes from like my background. Like my parents were always so supportive of me. They were
Hmm.
like, "Go support you, even if you fail in any way."
Hmm.
And like my homestay family, they were always so supportive. Like like thinking back, I think they could have like discriminated me because obviously I'm like not their kid, and they
Yeah.
did have like two kids like who are their own, but they always treated me fairly. They were always so supportive.
Yeah.
They were always so loving, and because like I had like multiple families that look over me, like love me so much, I was able to build up that self confidence. And
Mhm.
I just as a person is such a positive person that I try to have a lot of positivity in me. So those kind of positivity is usually what comes off in interviews.
hmm Do you think that that's a really good quality and more people should have it? Because I do. I think that more people should probably be happier and probably more positive in general, which I work with a lot of people on that. So in case anyone would ever want that, you can check out my website down below.
Yeah, definitely. Positivity always helps. I do think but if you're so positive, you tend to miss those little things. So
Yeah.
I tend to be, I might be a lot more less sensitive than people who are more towards the negative side.
Okay.
So always there are going to be pros and cons, but
Yeah.
for me, I always benefited from being positive, being always nice, smiling a lot. So that is something that I do like
hmm
about myself.
So I have to ask, just because it's something that I've run across with a couple other people, and that's especially in Eastern cultures, is this idea of I think it's called maintaining face. I know that I've had Evie Fang on here, Ham Tornado. I had Susie Kim on here and both of them kind of talked about it. Like in Korean and Chinese cultures, it's pretty important to have this idea of like maintaining face, where you don't like kind of show emotions. Is this an aspect of maintaining face, or is this just you're genuinely happy with yourself?
Oh, this is definitely me genuinely being happy with myself. I actually am kind of a person who never maintains face, I guess.
hmm
I'm always very honest about my emotions and how I feel, and I feel like that's very important for me to share to other people. So even in school, when I feel like something isn't right,
Yeah.
I would step up and like even in Korean schools, and then my Korean classmates would be, "Hey, don't speak out," kind of thing. So I think growing up in like Western culture definitely helped me like be that kind of a person.
hmm
So my personality is a lot different than what um, like a typical Korean person growing up in a typical Korean
Yeah.
household would be.
hmm
So yeah, I think that's what makes me unique, to be honest.
Okay, so I want to ask then, because you've worked with Korean players, has this, and I've seen it with Korean players, and I've heard it with other Korean players. This idea of maintaining face is kind of a huge thing, and obviously in esports, I think it's kind of important for people to actually be more in touch with their emotions, generally speaking. Do you notice this is kind of a problem with some of the like Korean players you've seen in the scene? This idea that they don't actually get in touch with themselves.
Um, Personally, I don't think I have ever experienced that. Like, especially coming from Justice, where our whole team is just full of PMA. Like, we
hmm
were very honest in showing our opinions. We were very honest on stage on how we feel. Um, we were happy with playing with each other, so they really enjoyed having their time up there.
Yeah.
So I don't think it was really an issue for us. But yeah, not really, personally.
Okay.
I actually never noticed like maintaining a face is really important. That's
Hmm.
just something that like the players I've worked with or um yeah, that haven't really done. Maybe
Yeah.
it's because like it might be a side effect of me being positive and then telling
Maybe.
them to be yourself, like they never
hmm
had that issue. But yeah, that's something that I don't encounter that often.
Okay. So kind of looking at your school and deciding to go into law school. So I'm assuming you did fairly decent in school, right? Like, I mean, you obviously were going to law school. What made you decide as you were kind of going through school, you know what I want to do in life? I want to be a lawyer.
So funny thing, at age 8, I told my parents, "Hey, mom and dad, I'm gonna be a lawyer."
Hmm.
For no reason. I don't know why. Um, I thought that, oh, speaking up, I mean, I speak pretty well, and
hmm
speaking up for someone, helping someone out seems like a really cool job. I want to be a lawyer. And like moving on to high school, I did pretty decently in high school. I got full scholarship in college. I
hmm
went to all women's college actually in Massachusetts, and I graduated as top of my class. I had a 3.96 GPA out of a 4.0 and went to law school. Yeah, so I pretty much like speed ran, being top of the class, always being the best student in the class, kind of thing. So it's just really natural actually in Korea for people who have good grades, especially if you are a social science major, to move on to law school.
Okay.
But then for me, it was just like natural. Like from age 8, I thought that I would be a great lawyer. I thought that the job was pretty cool. You know, it gives you some social values in your life. You get some social authority. So I thought it was pretty cool, and you might make a lot of money out of it. So
Okay.
that's
What kind of lawyer would you want to be? Because when I was younger, I thought about, actually, when I was first going to college, I thought about being a lawyer. And I quickly came to the conclusion that I probably couldn't do corporate law. I wouldn't want to be a prosecuting attorney. And I was like, the only thing I could really do is probably be a defense attorney that would like be okay with my inner like moral dynamic. What type of lawyer did you want to be?
So when I was young, like around like when I was a teenager, I wanted to be a lawyer that represents celebrities. So I wanted to be an entertainment lawyer.
Okay.
But then more towards like as I was applying to law school, a lot of different things that I've done led me to be more of like a defense attorney, like you said. Just because I thought like everyone's voice should be heard, whether they've committed a crime or not, and I felt that was like so important.
Yeah.
Through my experiences. So yeah, that is why I moved up.
Do you remember any of those experiences that really stand out that make you think this is one of the events in my life that helped shape the fact that I wanted to be a defense attorney?
I would love to share, but it does involve a lot of politics into it.
Okay.
So yeah, things that I cannot share.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Understandable. Sad, but understandable. So kind of looking at that, was Massachusetts and going to college your first time in the United States?
It was. Oh, actually, the second time. First time I went there, so I did a lot of Model UNs growing up. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
I think we have Model UN too.
Yeah. So there was actually a Model UN happening in Berkeley, UC Berkeley, and I was invited to that. So I went in my senior year of high school to Model UN in Berkeley, and that's when I first went to US. But for living, for actual studying, yeah, it was my first time.
Okay, so what was that experience like for you? Were you excited? Were you nervous? Were you scared? Were you just looking forward to moving to the United States?
I mean, I moved so many times in my life, like taking the plane, moving. It wasn't like big of a deal. The most worrying thing actually was, how am I gonna buy a new cell phone, get a new SIM for it, and connect all those Wi-Fi stuff up was my biggest concern, to be honest. I just did pretty well, obviously, because I don't feel uncomfortable speaking English. So that I don't think I was ever like worried about going to college. Like going to new places is always exciting for me.
Yeah.
Opportunities are exciting. Learning about stuff that I don't know about is exciting too. So yeah, and like the campus was very pretty. So.
Okay, so you moved to Massachusetts. You had mentioned in a different interview you started playing Overwatch because of a boyfriend, because you wanted to, I believe it was spend more time with him. So before Overwatch, did you ever really get into video games? Were video games a huge part of your life?
Not at all. As you can tell, I was like, very, I guess, top of the class student who always studied. Like after I finished my lectures, I would go to a library, do projects, write essays, read books that I was supposed to read. So actually, the Overwatch is like my first ever video game that I ever played. I wasn't into gaming at all, so I think that is why it like drew me so much, because this is, everyone remembers their first gaming experience, right? For me, Overwatch was like my first gaming experience. Like it was actually mind blowing that you can play a game online and then like talk to people in your team. and like make strats and play a game together. Like honestly, that's something that I haven't experienced before. So those kind of experiences were very exciting, and I think that's what drew me to Overwatch so much.
So what was the progression to the point where you're like, okay, I'm gonna drop out of school? Like, how did it get to that point where you're like, I don't want to do law school anymore? But your parents were very okay with you not doing law school, it sounds like. But what was the progression up to the point where you said, I'm done, we're gonna come back to this maybe later on?
Okay, so I first started playing Overwatch while I was preparing for law school. There are only, I believe, 20 law schools in Korea, so there's not a lot. So because there are so little amount of law schools, it is very hard to get in. So usually students take about 1 year or 2 year to prepare for law school.
Yeah.
And it was the same for me. It took me 2 years to get into law school. While I was preparing, I had to find a hobby of my own, and that's when I started playing Overwatch. So that was just like casual gaming, and I actually really got to like start scrimming, watching scrims, coaching players when I got accepted to law school. So there is this 3 months, approximately like. So after you take your LSAT, which there is only once in Korea, so after a one-time LSAT in your whole year, which happens in August, you have around September from November to prepare for your interviews. And because you only have to prepare for your interviews, you have so much time. And then after your interviews from November to like March, when you have to go to school, there is just so much time. Of course, you have to kind of prepare ahead and stuff, but you have a lot more time than you had when you were preparing for LSAT. So I had a lot of time, so that's when I started scrimming. That's when I started watching scrims. That's when I started coaching. And then through my first semester of law school, I actually did coaching and law school at the same time. So I would get up at 6 a.m. and then go to school and then study before school starts, and then take lectures till like 6 p.m., eat, review, actually eat, and then come back to my dorm to watch scrims again until 10, I mean. And then from 10 to 12, I would do feedbacks, and then from 1 to 2, I would do like all my other stuff, studying that I have to do. And then I would only usually sleep for like 4 hours. So I did that all through first semester of college. And then during summer break, when I should have actually been prepared for second semester, I actually took on like almost a full-time job at Meta Bellium. And we were doing contenders at the time, so we prepared for contenders. And like those 2 months that I took off from law school and actually like fully did coaching, it was like very enjoyable. And like as I was like preparing to get back to law school, so it was like 1 week before school started, I said, I actually don't really want to, go back to law school. And then my parents said, you know what, I think you should actually take break to do gaming. And I said, okay. And at that time, I didn't even have any kind of offers. It was just finally us thinking that, hey, we could get a job in this industry. So that's how we started. Thankfully, it worked out very well. And, so, the story goes from there.
Yeah. So your first semester of your law school, when you were putting so much time into like video gaming, were you able to still maintain all of your grades and stuff doing 1 to 2 hours worth of work on them?
So I believe my grades were A minus, B plus, and a B.
Okay, so you were.
So I think I did okay.
Yeah. That's interesting. Did you ever have to worry about like burning out though? Or was that something like that? Did you ever get like really exhausted from doing that intense schedule where you're literally sleeping only like 4 hours a day most days?
I don't think so. I wasn't burnt out at all while I was in law school because I had to maintain a tight schedule. I had to do so much but I was like so passionate, so motivated every day that I don't think I was ever burnt out. I think personally for me, like because like trying hard, using all your time efficiently, having no break is kind of a thing that I usually experience. I usually work very well in those kind of environment because that's just kind of environment that I'm just so used to. So for me personally, burnout happens when I have like all the break in the world.
Yeah. I can kind of relate to that. I like being stressed, and I like I actually think I prefer being stressed over not being stressed. But
Really?
I don't know if that's a normal thing. Like, very realistically, I've just worked in so many stressful jobs now that like it's a little bit weird not to be stressed about things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of an interesting thing. So you obviously got hired by Washington Justice. I kind of want to go into that hiring process a little bit, as well as the fact that you actually, in a different interview, you said you had like 5 different teams that were reaching out to you. I was curious, like, what was that entire process like? Did you have other offers? What made you kind of choose Washington Justice over everything else?
So I believe I had trials, interview offers from 5 different teams at the time. So actually, when Washington Justice reached out, I already finished interview with one team. I was scheduling a meeting with another team to sign a contract, and Washington Justice was just in midst of it. But I liked Justice because the process moved so quickly. Like, they were the last team that reached out to me, but they were the first team to offer me a contract.
Okay.
That just shows how fast they were on terms of their process. I believe I got an interview on Tuesday, and then I got an offer on Thursday, and I got a contract the week after. For other teams, I got like an interview opportunity, and then 2 weeks later I had a tryouts, and then like 2 weeks later they wanted to set up a meeting to actually meet, and then like 2 weeks later still nothing. So I was really tired of the waiting process. There was one other team that I really wanted to go, that actually said, sorry, but we were actually in terms of like talking about contract details, right? And they said, sorry, but our players don't want female coaches, so we're gonna make that not happen anymore. So that happened. At that point, I was really kind of sick of the long process that I was going through, that I just signed with the first team that offered me a contract.
Do you think that, like, hindsight 2020 is kind of the saying? Do you think, looking back now, that was the correct approach to still side with Washington Justice, or you think you should have maybe waited and seen what some of those longer processes were like?
Personally, I think that signing with Justice was, even in hindsight, like the correct thing to do, because unlike other teams that had a lot of well-known head coaches, I mean, Washington did too, but Washington still offered me a lot of chances to be seen on media. And a lot of people got to know me through Washington, and a lot of things that Washington did, I learned a lot from it. Like, if I went to a team that already had a roster, I wouldn't have learned anything through like tryouts or roster processes or anything. But because I was able to be involved in so many things, I got to learn a lot, I think.
Okay. So one of the things I want to ask you, you are there was a lot of media around you being the first female coach in Overwatch, which I think is good. Does that come with a ton of pressure? And was that something that you wanted to be known for? Did you want that label to be kind of thrown on you?
I mean, yeah, kind of.
Well, I mean, like Gaguri, as an example, I believe actually came out and said, I don't want to be like this label that everyone is kind of doing. I'm pretty sure she said that. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure. And I mean, there is a ton of pressure on that.
I mean, yes, there is a ton of pressure. I just thought of it as like, a reward for making so far up, because I mean, a lot of other females in the scene says there is no discrimination, there is no things that I get by being a female. But personally, for me, I felt that a lot, especially coming from a Korean scene. It's just so hard to be a female coach in the Korean scene. It's just like almost impossible. And I know so many female coaches that have given up or is in the process of giving up because it's just so hard. And like a lot of people just saying that I'm the first female coach, I just thought of it as like, hey, I'm getting this attention because I made it up through
Yeah.
such a hard process. And I thought because I know so many female coaches, female analysts, that I have to do well, represent them, like, talk for them. So I
Yeah.
don't think I actually was personally like felt pressure. I
Yeah.
just, maybe this is kind of pressuring, but I always thought of it as this is a reward. I should do well because I'm like this one example that people will like reference in the future.
Yeah. So, I mean, you even mentioned like some people say that there's no discrimination, but at least you have a personal story that someone literally discriminated against you just because you are a female coach, which whoever that team
Yeah.
is, that's so bullshit. And also in the United States, it is also illegal. I'm just throwing that out there. Like literally it is illegal in the United States. So whoever you are, just saying, you're an interesting
Yeah.
human being.
I mean, in 2020, I did get a lot of interview questions, like literally something along the lines of, you're a female going into 2020 model, where there will be so much more like traveling around you,
Yeah.
traveling, there will be extra expenses because you'll be a girl. Like, why should we hire you over other candidates? Kind of question.
I'm pretty
So
sure those questions are also illegal in the United States. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm pretty sure. Oh, esports. Sometimes esports makes me so sad with some of the stuff that like people don't seem to realize. These like there are actually questions that are illegal to ask people during interviews for very specific reasons in the United States. So I don't know what it is outside of the United States, but I know certain questions like that. I'm willing to bet money that shit's illegal. So holy Jesus Christ, people.
But I mean, there are so many other orgs who didn't even ask me any questions regarding my gender.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were definitely teams who value me because I'm marketable to other females,
Yeah.
or who definitely mention my gender in interviews by saying because you're a female, blah 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 kind of questions. But yeah, a lot of other orgs were a lot more not like that. So those kind of orgs are really what draws me.
Does it make you mad when people do that? Like when they're not just looking at your skill as a coach, when the focus isn't actually your skill with handling people, with being a coach. Does it make you mad when people are so focused on these other things? Because it would piss me off.
I mean, me as a positive person,
I would be positively angry. That's for sure.
I don't know. I guess I was just so used to it, like coming up from a Korean scene. It's just something that you always consider, like, hey, you're a female, you can't live in a team house. Can you come to work every day? Like, although all the other coaches and players are living in this house, can you come from your house instead? Or things like that. So just those kind of questions were an extension of what I've been receiving already, so it didn't really surprise me. I actually thought those kind of questions are very fair. Obviously, as an org, like you have to make profit, you have to make wiser decisions than your other options. So that's what I thought. I mean, I was like okay with being asked those questions.
Okay.
I think I answered them pretty well, so hopefully.
Okay. I mean, I'm hoping the best for you too. So
Thank you.
kind of looking at the legality, I know it was kind of almost like a drama out there that you were actually taking legal actions against someone who was doing like stuff against you. What's the story behind that?
So for people who don't know, there are actually laws, like criminal laws in Korea, that says you cannot say bad things about other person in public.
I think there are some. I think it's called in the United States defamation of, or it might, if you like libel versus the other one, which I can't remember. Whichever one is like saying bad shit about people.
Yeah,
that is not
true. So there are laws like that. It's quite strictly enforced, especially people who are in public with their faces and names open. And in Korean Contenders, when we used to have LAN contests, LAN Contenders, I was in charge of doing a lot of interviews for our teams. So me with my interviews, with my name, like team, Meta Belgium, Avalla, there with my Korean name. And I mean, there are a lot of mean people on the internet.
Yes.
Let's just face it.
Yeah.
So, so unfortunately, because there are a lot of mean people that were saying a lot of stuff about me, Korea is very strict if you're obese. And because I am obese, I guess, a lot of people were saying bad things about how I look. And one thing that I do not accept is something about my looks, because growing up as a kid in New Zealand and Australia, I always was taught that was not right.
Yeah.
And I mean, people can shit talk me about my coaching, about whatever, but like being looks is just one thing that I will not accept. And me, as a person who went to law school, who know the laws, thought, hey, maybe it's time to use my major into action, you know? So that's when I actually started taking legal actions. I actually did not take like that much actions. I believe I sued like 7 people. But then I uploaded it to make it as like, you know, I will take actions if necessary.
Yeah.
So at your like own will, at your own cost, like
Yeah.
do
So
what you feel.
Can I ask? You said you sued 7 people. Out of those 7 people, how many of them lost in court?
I actually, I believe like 5 of them lost in court, I believe.
Wow.
And then 2 of them, they weren't even sued at all because it was like very low level. They didn't have any criminal stuff. And those, it was actually amazing. Like a lot of those 7 people, they actually came like to almost like where I live, which is kind of far from like Seoul, but they actually came to say apologize and try to make, you know, a
Amends.
compromise kind of deals. Yeah.
Huh. That is pretty incredible. I'm like, that's pretty impressive, and I'm very happy that that kind of like all worked out for you. So I have to ask you, you joined Washington Justice. Your guys' season did not go, I don't think, as planned. One of the interviews you kind of talked about is you guys didn't scout particularly well. And I actually had MK Allen here who kind of talked about it too. And the fact that you guys didn't think that you guys were planning for a 2-2-2 meta.
I wouldn't necessarily say 2-2-2 meta, but at the time, Wizard was very focused on scouting a good Widow player after everything he experienced in Stage 4. And in playoffs, obviously, like Widow Brick was very strong.
No.
Widow was like one of the major important heroes that you had to get. So we scouted a lot on Widow. So yeah, like Wizard wanted to scout a very good Widow player, so that's how we scouted. But we just scouted on so many different metas. I believe we said this in our preseason interview with Kate, but we did mention how we scouted for like Genji Tracer. Like we tried out like many different metas, like 4 or 5 different metas. So we had players play like different characters every tryouts to pick the most flexible players that there were.
Okay. So do you think that, I mean, obviously the first 3 stages did not go that well for you guys. Do you think that that's on fault due to your guys' scouting? Do you think that that was the issue, you guys scouted poorly, or do you think it was poor coaching? Like if you had to attribute like probably the major thing that was the issue.
I think I like popular belief that was coaching / scouting. I think the biggest issue for our team was communication. Like I believe in Stage 2, everyone on our roster except for Corey was Korean, and even Yanis, who is known to be fluent, actually is not really fluent. He can understand English pretty well, but he has issues speaking. He wasn't very vocal, and a lot of our players, just because they had to speak in English, wasn't vocal. Wizard had this idea that he thought that communication is like very important for the team. But because these Korean players weren't able to talk very well in English, like we just had so less comms. And on stage, like a lot of players were getting stage fright kind of because they were nervous. They couldn't calm as well as they were doing in scrims, and just misunderstanding, miscommunication between frontline, backline, because it had to be spoken in English, was like major reason why we fell so hard during Goats meta, because I feel like Goats is not so much on mechanics but so much on teamwork.
Yeah.
And then if you have like 3 stages of teammates not being able to communicate with each other very well, I think communication was our biggest reason why we were bad at Goats.
So, looking at communication, was that were you not able to scout that beforehand? Because that seems like something that people would probably try to scout beforehand. Is how well can these teammates communicate, or did you guys just miss that?
I think the general idea was that you would be able to teach Korean kids to be better at English.
Okay.
And speak Overwatch English. And that was the idea that Wizard had, and we were supposed to get English lessons, which didn't really happen. So players didn't receive English lessons till later towards the season, and because of that, like they weren't able to speak very well. Yeah.
That makes sense. When did you guys actually start getting English lessons? Was it stage 3?
I think it was stage 4.
Wow.
But I'm actually not sure.
Okay, so it was somewhere between that time, but that's like almost most of the way done through the season, and I'm guessing after you had new management put in.
Yeah.
So kind of looking at that. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just saying that a lot of our issues were due to management. So once we got new management, like everything, including English lessons, were handled so well.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense then. What was that transition like from old management to new management? Like, how much were you guys in the loop? How much were you aware of? What were some of the biggest issues that were literally by management? Because if it wasn't your guys' fault, then I think people should at least know that, hey, listen, some of the management, which is now replaced, is a good cure thing for Washington Justice in the future. So Washington Justice fans, don't flame me because you're better now. But what were some of the issues that kind of happened there?
Well, a lot of the issues are obviously under NDA, so I cannot talk about. But things that I think I can talk about are that we were managementless. So we didn't have management for like so long. So I think in stage 2, at the end of stage 2, I believe Kate said she was gonna retire, but then she actually almost stopped working from middle of stage 2. Mm-hmm. And then we didn't have a house manager for such a long time. So without like a house manager, without our GM, we were pretty much on our own to do our own management. People often said if Washington was so bad at Goats and they thought they had a bad Zarya player, why didn't they get a new Zarya player? Those kind of like signing players.
Yeah, you can't do any of it.
Stuff like that. We couldn't do any of it. I mean, yeah, and like a lot of the trades that happened, we got to know at like last minute, or sometimes we would know through like Twitter, like my fans in my Discord were saying, hey, oh my gosh, you guys got this player, like that's so pog. And I'm like, whoa, we got those players, you know? So that's what happened. So I mean, and a lot of the things can go so wrong. Like I think during Washington, one thing that I learned is that having good management is like so important. And that's why I think Washington is in good hands in the future, because Grant, our BP, and Aaron, our assistant GM, both of who I have worked with. I haven't worked with Ballin, so I have no idea how she works. But at least those two from our management were always so hardworking. They were so goal-driven. We had so many philosophies line up together. They were really interested in scouting earlier on stages. So once they came in stage 3, we were able to do a lot better. And with good management, like towards end of stage 3, start of stage 4, we were able to do so well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that makes a ton of sense. So kind of looking through the season, was it just mostly getting English lessons that made stage 4 so much better for you guys?
Definitely not. Stage 4, it helped because a lot of the heroes that were in the meta, our players were good at, but also because we really started to enjoy working as a team. Okay. So not only were players more comfortable in the heroes that were playing, for example, like Widow or like Guido on Ana or Sansam on Hawk, those kind of heroes that were like fitting in very well together because that was one of their strongest heroes. But also, like as I said, in stage 1 to 3, we had so much communication issue.
Yeah.
But after like 3 stages, and I think a lot of the players were thinking that they wouldn't be able to re-sign with the team.
Yeah.
Because we did so bad in stage 3. So they were like, hey, I'm actually gonna show what I'm capable of doing, and I'm actually gonna enjoy myself being on stage, and I'm gonna try my best, and I'm just gonna enjoy playing the game. And because of that kind of mentality, we worked so much better as a team, and they were clinging very well with the team.
Yeah.
And I think we had a better idea moving on. Like in stage 4, unlike stage 1 to 3, I did a lot of macro coaching. So, hey, we're gonna use this kind of strat here. Let's do this. Let's position here for certain maps. And I think because we had a better macro idea, better explanation, better planning than we did in goats, I think those kind of coaching changes and also like the meta changes and also our mentality changes was really what led us to our success in stage 4.
Okay, I think that makes a lot of sense. So one of the things I want to ask you about is previously in an interview, you kind of mentioned that in Korea, results are super important. And that's like a huge thing with the teams that you're on. Did you guys not doing well with Washington Injustice ever affect you? Because like this being result driven would be really hard for a team that did very poorly for 3 stages.
Definitely. So I remember when I was in Contenders, a lot of people were only saying good things about me almost.
Yeah.
But now they only say bad things about me because our team does so bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get a lot of blame. I get a lot of hate. I get a lot of criticism in Korean community. That's why I don't go in Korean community as often as I used to anymore.
Yeah.
Especially after what I said about like us scouting, like there was just a lot of blame on like poor scouting and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I should take credit because I said it, but it wasn't really my decision. But you know,
Yeah.
but yeah, it is very definitely true. People don't like me anymore. But I guess if I do make it on a new team, then maybe people will like think about that team's result and now evaluate me differently. It's just what happens. Like if you go on a good team, they just like you because you're on a good team. But if you go on a bad team, they just don't like you because you're on a bad team. I think that's just something that naturally happens.
They have no inside knowledge either, because like especially if you're not a head coach, like I can understand like the head coach has a lot of responsibility because at the very least normally they hire the people, and so whether or not the person is good or not you can't really tell, but you know that this person put together most likely everything around them, and so generally the blame, that's why head coaches get paid more, because they also get the blame on how a team kind of works. So kind of looking at that, Wizard was kind of known to be like literally a genius. Like everyone was like, oh, this Wizard is the genius of Overwatch. He did so much with NYXL. Did he get kind of made to be a bigger deal than he actually is? Is he really that good of a genius? Because that says a lot about like the stages and everything there. Is he that smart, or is maybe the community giving him, kind of like you mentioned before, they make people way bigger when they're on a really successful team?
Maybe I'm honestly not so sure. Like, I know that there was this huge thing about his stats and everything.
Yeah.
But personally, like for me, I didn't get to see a lot of stats. Maybe Wizard did show them a lot of stats, like their individual coaching and stuff. But personally, I didn't get to see a lot of stats, which was something that I was looking forward to with working with Wizard. So that was kind of a shame that we didn't really get to see a lot. Towards stage 4, he did help out a lot more with mental coaching than actually like coaching the team. So rather than to like give feedbacks from scrims or doing strats, he was more so helping players, get through stage 4, and which was like super helpful for the team. It was really important. And that is why I had to like do a lot of macro coaching as a counter hand. But I mean, maybe the community made it. He did work hard, uh, but I honestly haven't seen a lot of his, like, because the whole genius thing was around his stats, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't get to see a lot of his stats, so I don't think I'm in like the right position to
That's fair.
actually evaluate that. Yeah.
So, did you guys not get to use for Washington Justice? Stats are an interesting and broad because I've talked to Gumba, I've talked to Barai. I don't know if you know who Barai is. He works with Toronto Defiant. He's the one who
I
made.
do know Thor.
I love Barai. Barai's one of my favorite people. But both of them are really kind of big on stats. They think that they're a really good way to objectively kind of show things. You shouldn't take them as like factual information, but you need to know how to read stats too. Did you guys at Washington you mentioned you didn't see a lot of stats. Did you or MKL like bring up your own stats or put things in perspective for players that was more of an objective way to showcase information? I know you took clips to kind of show things, which is a very almost like these are all the times you're doing these things.
Definitely, I did use stats that I made. So, for example, I believe I talked about this. So, for example, like say you're talking to a player and you say, "Hey, I think you are not rezzing people enough," and then they say, "That's not true. I res a lot." And then you say, then if you just argue, "I don't think so," like it gives nothing. So in order to persuade the player, you're actually rezzing a lot less than other players. You have to, like, showing stats is really important because a lot of the players that I've talked to have said stats never lie, and they tend to really trust stats. So
that is
often
hilarious. I need to stop you just for a second. That's hilarious because literally the first thing you learn in a statistics class is lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Yeah. But that's how a lot of players feel like. And so when you show stats saying, "Hey, you know what? You actually, like, for example, you actually discord Ryan way less than other players," they tend to say, "Wow, really?" And then they like start paying attention to you.
Yeah.
So I use stats, I use clips in collaboration to persuade players to change their play style. But then I always like giving players options. Options to choose from. So they can always like pick either one on how they want to play.
Yeah. I also saw an interview you kind of do almost like a Socratic method where you're like, what do you think first? So that way you can kind of prime them and get them ready to start thinking, and hopefully they kind of get in it too, which I greatly appreciate because people learn way better that way.
Yeah, and I actually, when I'm actually coaching, I don't have a conclusion. So it's usually me showing various ways of how something could be, and then explaining logically, you need to do A and B and C in order for us to win, and then making that like logical so the players can follow. So
I like that. I like that a lot. Kind of looking at the coaching dynamic itself. What does it look like to work with other coaches, and how do you guys start to divvy up the responsibilities? Is that mostly just the head coach dictating, or do you guys have your own? You mentioned you were doing macro coaching, and so are you just responsible for all that? How much autonomy do you have for just dictating what you're going to be doing?
So usually that's like 100% almost up to the head coach to decide. So some teams have positional coaching, some teams have like different scout, like for enemy scouting coach, like player development coach. And some teams, they just have like almost 3 head coaches. They like debate over strats and how they want to be. So it's really different. And honestly, like the way it gets decided is like a head coach decides. So
what was it like in Washington?
So in Washington, we were known for doing positional coaching. So usually Wizard was in charge of doing macro coaching. I was doing support coaching. MKL was doing tank coaching. Sherga was doing DPS coaching. And then in stage 4, because Wizard felt like, hey guys, I think it's really important to keep these guys in the right mentality. It's really important for team atmosphere. I've learned that team atmosphere is so important. So I'm going to focus on this. You guys focus more on coaching. So that's how I naturally moved on to macro coaching because I was usually the one who was like lobby leading scrims, doing leading scrims, like getting players together. So it's just natural for me to fill in the gaps between like maps, saying, hey, I think we should do this, we should do that. And I usually play rank a lot, and because I'm at GM level, it's usually I learn a meta really quickly by playing it. So I have a very quick meta understanding by playing it. So when Stage 4 started and a new meta came, like I was able to read the game more quickly. So it was just natural for me to like help do macro stuff.
Okay. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. So what do you want teams to, like, if you had to like sell yourself to a team, you have to give a 30-second pitch to any team. Why should a team pick you up over someone else?
Wow, that is a very hard question. I think teams should actually pick me up because in 2020, there is going to be so much traveling, and you're not going to be able to have the luxury of being in a team house together, working like 12 hours, 14 hours. And the way I work is so efficient. I can like work on my iPad, I can work on my laptop. And because it's so time efficient that because I can work so much within so little time in a 2020 scene where you'll be traveling most of the time, like this kind of efficiency will be so beneficial for teams. This is actually what I really actually said in our interview.
Okay, I like that. I think that's a good thing. So, believe it or not, that's basically. I have one last question for you. Okay, it's my last question. I've really enjoyed our time together, though. It's been a lot of fun.
Me too.
I don't know if you didn't have fun. I'm sorry, but I hope you do. So my last question, which is arguably the hardest or easiest, depending on who you are. Having had the experience being on this show, if you could choose like one or two people you would like to see on the show, the only criteria is that they have to speak English, because I am uncultured and only speak English, or they have to be involved in, because it's changed, media in some scenes. So it can be a YouTuber, it can be a streamer, it can be someone involved with esports, it can be someone behind the scenes of any of these three things. Who would you like to see on this show?
Wow, that is a very hard question. That is hard. Let me think.
Yeah, take your time.
Let me think. Someone involved in media.
Yeah.
Or esports. And I don't know who was on your show previously.
If you say so, if you say someone, I'll let you know.
All right. I think someone worth interviewing is okay. Oh, actually, I know. Is a Face from Talon Esports.
Okay.
So he was a person who was on Energy Esports, now is working at Talon. I first got to know him because he was in the Australian Contenders team. His team was actually scrimming my team, and then he found that I was a Aussie, so we got friends. And after everything I talked about Australia and New Zealand, I'm pretty sure he'll make the show more cultural. And he's an English speaker, so and he recently was at Gauntlet as an assistant coach for Talon, who did so well. So I think it's definitely worth a talk on how their success was, how they prepared, what kind of mentality they came in as. So I think it'll be quite interesting.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's a good shout out, because I actually think Gunba might have said Face too. Believe it or not. I think so, because I think he's also working with the Australian team. I think he might actually be working.
Really?
I think so. Don't quote me on that. I think so. I don't know. But I just want to thank you so much for being on the show, Avalla. It's been a ton of fun having you on here. If you have any shout outs, you're more than welcome to take them. I normally don't give them, but if you want them, you can have them.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It was so fun, actually, to be here. I actually almost lost my voice because I talked so much, but it was fun.
Good. That's good. So thank you so much for being on the show. For everyone out there, this has been The Minds of Media. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Bye.